Hey folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is important. It's the three-act structure, something very easy to understand. They create these stages create pacing. They create suspense. They create useful categories to break the story into to help us understand it. They are very important to storytelling. Your characters all have a story. They do not have a large number of stories that are, just laid out there as a smorgasbord. They have a story. Um, and it's very important that that story have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is because while we like to think we relate to characters as figures from a story with characteristics that we admire and characteristics that we don't admire or that we actively despise at times. The fact is that that's not actually how we relate to characters. We relate to characters as if they were people. And when characters don't demonstrate the behavior we expect of people, we begin to get cognitive dissonance. We begin to forget that we lose our willing suspension of disbelief. Let's put it that way. The characters get less and less believable. Their stories become less entertaining because we are less able to build with them the rapport we would have with a real person. And a character who just goes on and on and on, whose fundamentals don't change, they become unbelievable. They become unrecognizable sometimes. We begin to relate to them as if we were an abusive friend trying to control them and keep them the way they are. We begin to protest all their changes. And I don't mean to come off as one of these, self-satisfied creators that you see on Twitter who berate the fans for, not wanting their characters changed. It's natural to not want your characters changed. It's natural to not want your characters to mutate like Luke Skywalker did in The Last Jedi from a bright, optimistic, hopeful, dedicated, loyal guy into whatever that was on that island that Rey found. But there is a certain dissonance with reality there. And that is why when you write a character, their beginning, their middle, and their end must be taken into account. I know there are people who think that you can just stretch characters out indefinitely and their mythological nature will carry them on, or their archetypical nature will hold them through all of these stories. I disagree. And I think that a lot of what happens in modern comic books is a symptom of this. The most clear example is the undoing of Spider-Man's marriage, I think. This is just personal opinion. You can't scientifically measure this, of course. But Joe Quesada felt like he was at the end of Spider-Man's story, and he felt like he needed more. He needed more middle because Spider-Man was a moneymaker, and he couldn't have it end. So he tried to go back to the middle. He made Spider-Man single, and this was a terrible decision. I think that's pretty clear from the way the audience reacted, and people don't really talk about Spider-Man storylines very often after that point, unless it's to roll their eyes at them, like when they did the Superior Spider-Man and Doc Ock was Spider-Man for a while. I actually read the paperback where that started, and it was pretty eye-rolling, I will confess. Now, I'm not a Spider-Man expert. I'm just offering this as an example of the kinds of problems that arise when you don't allow a character's story to end. Um, Now, just because one character's story has ended doesn't mean they're gone for good. A perfect example of this, of course, was Mayday Parker and the Spider Girl storyline. Uh, Peter's, his character was resolved. His character arcs were done. His growth as a character was no longer center stage, and he was the mentor to May Parker. And that is a good way to use a character whose story has ended. They may not have the chops to hold, center stage anymore, but they can still do a lot that's very interesting and fun to read. Um, on the other hand, when you don't let their story end, you get these constant reboots. Look at Superman. What happened when they brought Brian Michael Bendis in? Um, he undid the character, a lot of the character writing that Tomasi did in an attempt to find fresh fodder. Um, and of course, nobody liked it. Everybody wanted Clark Kent to be Super Dad, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, I think I've read the Super Sons, and it's top notch stuff. And part of that is because Superman is a good mentor figure in that book. However, if you study any kind of big myth, there's its central pillar, and then there's the guest appearances, for lack of a better term. I'm going to use an example from Eastern myth, The Journey into the West. If you're familiar with the character of Sun Wukong, or the Monkey King, he is a famous rebel character. He's a trickster. He's very powerful, and he is immortal. He is a literal god in Eastern myth. Technically, the term is immortal, but they function much like Greek gods in Greek myths. And before he became a god, he partook in he did a bunch of stupid crap. In the beginning, he was the king of a tribe of monkeys. He was born from a stone egg, and he led them on all kinds of mischief. And he eventually made it into the heavens, where he stole several magic items that gave him immortality and incredible power. And he eventually caused such a ruckus that they called in the Buddha. And the Buddha showed him that he wasn't all that, stuck him under a mountain, and left him there. And eventually, when the Buddha sent a priest out of China and into India to retrieve the scriptures of Buddhism, he sent the monkey along with the Buddhist priest. And the monkey served the priest on this journey, and he redeemed himself. And they eventually got into the West after many trials and tribulations, and they retrieved the scriptures and they brought them back into China, and the monkey was set free, and he ascended back into heaven, and he took his place among the other immortals. And he continued to be a character in Chinese myth. He would show up from time to time. He was no longer a central character because his story had ended. And it was very important that it did end, because this was a redemption arc for a trickster and a criminal and a thief to redeem himself. But he wasn't really that interesting as a main character after he had done that. Because no character is as complex as a real person in real life. People's stories can keep going until they die because they are complex and they change. But characters, in order to remain true to themselves and to their stories, can't change. So while there are a lot of stories that draw on the journey into the West or other aspect of the Monkey King's myth, they respect the beginning, the middle, and the end of his story. They present him as a trickster, and they take you through his journey of rebellion and redemption, and then they allow the character's story to end. And that doesn't mean the character goes away, but his story is ended, and that is respected. That's an important part of his myth. And if you don't do that, you shackle yourself to the character. He becomes the inherent nature of the character renders him static. And if you try and break the nature of that character, you are in a situation like Quesada was in when he ran one more day. It's just not going to work, and it's not going to work for good reason. So I guess what I'm trying to say at the end of the day is it's great that Comicsgate is going out and doing their own thing. Comics needs that. It needs that badly. But this is a good time, I think, for comics creators to start thinking about how they want their characters to end. What is their end state? What is it going to be? What is it going to look like? And what are the consequences for your fictional world of that end state? How has the world been changed for the better or for the worse by them? And how are you going to allow that end state to persist while still allowing for new stories to grow up and take their place? This didn't used to be uncommon. The Flash was a legacy character for a long time, and the legacy was passed down from one Flash to another. Of course, Spider-Man was a legacy character. And of course, legacy was built into the modern understanding of the Green Lanterns. The Rings sought out new people after the old user retired or died. These are good ways for you to allow your character's story to end, but still keep them a part of your world and a part of other stories. So, yeah, that's all I really got to say. I don't know how coherent it was. This is something I feel strongly about, but it's difficult to articulate. I guess just, yeah, the constant rebooting, the constant search for the right character, right incarnation of a character. It's born out of a need to get to everyone has their favorite part of a character story, and everyone's trying to get to it. And then other parts of the audience don't like it. And once your audience is also the creators of the story, you have that problem. It would be better, in my opinion, if the audience, looked at their favorite part of the middle of the story and then tried to create something new. And I hope that's what Comicsgate will do. But there are people who don't want to do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I acknowledge the value of fan fiction and the ascended fan fiction that passes for comic books writing, I guess. But I think that audiences are better served by stories that end. And I think that if you're going to be a writer, the audience is your first and greatest responsibility. So, yeah. Anyway, that's all I've got to say. Like I said, I don't know how coherent it was, how clear it was, but there it is. So yeah, there's a like button, a subscribe button down below. Go ahead and use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.